Chapter 2, the story of Cora. Cora had a philandering husband, like many women do. Men do. That's a two-way street. She only married once. She was divorced. Her divorce was sketchy, and I will tell you what she told me about her. Was it a divorce, or was it not? Her philandering husband. I'll tell you about that later, but um, he was a charmer. She said he could charm any woman anytime. Now she never divulged to me what those charms were, but she said he had them. He he was very charming, and Cora's personality was the complete opposite of that. She was reticent. She was quiet, and whereas she said he filled up the room with his personality. So one and done, divorced, never remarried, love of her life. That was never really clear to me. What was clear to me was that she had the responsibility of raising her children on her own with no help from him. He popped in and out and in and out for years until this so-called divorce. And he spent many years, she said, with the woman that he cheated uh, with on her. But he was more loyal to this other woman than he had ever been to her. So um, she never really talked in a bad way about him. She just would roll her eyes and uh, not really say much of anything when I would ask about him, because there were many pictures of them together and they looked like a very unlikely couple. So she became a server. She That was the job that she could get, and the job she did get, and that was how she paid for her home and how she raised her children, was by being a server at the time of life when she had it to do on her own, all on her own. And she went through some very, very tough years. Tough in that her children seriously went without, and there was nothing she could do at that time, she said, and it was something that broke her heart and something she regretted. And she said she would never really forgive herself for not being more proactive to change the course. She eventually did, but she felt she waited way longer than she should have. She cried way too many tears over her philandering husband. She wanted him in her life, I guess, until she didn't. Uh, so those were some of the regrets that she had. But as I said to her, you can't really do anything about the past. She did what she needed to do in the end, and that was really all that mattered. Did her children love her less for that? Only her children would have to sit here and answer that question. I'm going to say doubtful, very doubtful. Like her parents, like my parents, like all of our parents, we all think of them in the way that we do, regardless of what is said to us by others, what is done. We make our own opinions of our parents, and I'm sure that her children did as well. She was particularly close to her son that was left. As a matter of fact, she blamed herself for breaking up his first marriage. He ended up being married several times, but the first was, she felt, the real love of his life. And she felt she had been an interfering mother-in-law. He would stop by her house um, because she would get off early from her serving job, and she would make dinner, and he would stop by and have dinner and hang out with her every single night after work, and then he would go home to his young wife where she also had dinner. And she said, looking back, she knew that was a mistake, and that was another regret that she had of not making him break from her, because they were very close because of the philandering husband. She felt like he had stepped up to try to be strong for her, his mother, and she shouldn't have allowed that. She said she should have forced him to be the man, go home to your wife. You're now married. He was definitely of age to be married. This son she also lost in a very was in an accident. It was an illness, and I will speak of that later. But I think speaking to other people about the regrets that you have, sometimes it's freeing because there's no judgment. I think being judged harshly is another difficult thing to bear, and so she felt free to talk about these different regrets that she had about how she felt like she failed her children in many ways. And yet, when I looked at her and knew what she had been through in her life, the things she had endured, the poverty really at one point in her life, the way that she didn't have any lifelines really thrown to her in the end. She had to do it herself. And back then, there really were no services for women. There definitely were not. And yet, she stepped up. Whether she felt like it wasn't enough or what inside her heart remains to be seen. But she did. She did what she needed to do for her kids in the end. And I loved hearing the story of how she felt she had failed as a parent, because she hadn't. I knew she hadn't. I saw the photos. You could see it. There was no failure there. Maybe not being everything you could be, your potential, whatever, however people want to judge the past. You only fail if you don't try, right? And she tried. There's so much more to the story of Cora.